The Christian thing to do is to practice hope. But where the ego ends, where the knowing ends, that's where the Christian life begins. Hi everyone, Angelo here. I'm a creative and theologian, and it's the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time. So we're in chapter 5 of Luke, and in this story here, we have Jesus calling some of his disciples. Actually, it's like the core of his disciples because it's most noteworthy, Peter, and then of course James and John as well. So what happens is that Jesus is out teaching. So then you see a boat and say, you know what, let me get in this boat. And the boat happened to belong to Peter. And you tell Peter, all right, push out a little bit from the shore. And then he continues to teach. So then he tells Peter, all right, let me go out a little bit further and put your net out. And Peter saying, it had not now there. I work, me and my boys, we work whole night. It am not now there. And Jesus said, nah, try. And then when he try, then the net, we know the story, right? The net, it almost burst in because of how much fish in it, and they needed to get help from the other disciples, well, future disciples, to come and to be able to bring the net in. So then Peter, he realizes, okay, Jesus is a holy man. And then that's where he's like, don't stay around me, go from by me, because I am a sinner. You shouldn't be around me, and I shouldn't be around you. And then that's when Jesus says, don't worry, now you all will be fishers of people. Now I feel like this story describes what religion and more so spirituality, what it is like. In a sense where this story moves from a level of self-reliance and knowing to then the reality of letting go, depending on God, and not knowing. So, of course, this is shown in the way Peter was in the story, right? Because as far as he knew, given his experience too, they had nothing out there to catch. But then when he decides to let go and to step into the unknown, that's where his life changes altogether. And then, of course, he then goes to follow Jesus. And as after he there, he lets it all out. He's like, go from me. I am a sinful man, and don't be around me. But in that short encounter alone, I feel like there are two powerful things to look at. And the first is going from knowing to not knowing, and then the second is our ego with God. Now, I'm not sure, maybe perhaps what Jesus did here was normal back in the day. But to me, it seems like he being bold because he just gets into the man boat. And who knows, maybe perhaps there was some sort of business understanding between Peter and Jesus. But the thing is, I just don't see how a man, so I'm talking about Peter here, I don't see how a man who worked so hard all night and then wrapping up and getting ready to go home, especially after a night where it was dead, then he's just ready to get back up and go out again just like that. I don't see him just getting back up to go back out just like that. It's like, well, for anybody who work retail, it's like when you're closing the shop and then you're about to leave and then somebody run in the last minute begging to buy something. In that moment, you want to do nothing more than to just leave and to leave that person on the wayside, which is what I imagine Peter would have felt when it came to Jesus too. So it just makes me feel like, Peter had to expect something in return to do something like this. And at that point, it must be as when Jesus tell him, okay, let's go and put the net back out for a catch. So basically, Jesus looking to pay him and what he was looking to be paid in from the night before, which would have been the fish. Because I just feel like for a person, so like Peter again, for somebody who would have worked hard all night, or for so many of us in our cases, it might be that we work hard all day, or we spend a long time working on a project or something, and then we feel like we get to nowhere. There comes a moment, and I'm sure so many people know what I'm talking about here, but there comes a moment where we are at our own end. our own end of our own reasoning, our own end of our own self-reliance. And then in the midst of that chaos, because to be honest, that feeling feels like nothing less than chaos. But in the midst of that chaos, that's where God finds us. That's when somehow, by nothing less than divine providence, we end up experiencing the breakthrough moment. And that breakthrough moment happens when we are finally willing to let go and to not know. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, especially because so much of religion is about enlightenment. I don't know, somehow this is the beginning of it. This unknowing is the beginning of enlightenment. It's like God honors our willingness to not know, or to self-rely, or to hide from God like we would have did in the garden. God honors that with an incredible life. And I don't mean an incredible life by our current Western entertainment drunk standards of what makes for an incredible life. No. What I mean is that God honors with what a truly incredible life actually is. A life where we can find God in all things. A life where we can marvel at the wonders of God and the universe and all of creation. A life where we can see God's grace in everything. A life where every day becomes a gift. We're able to recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary. And even though some days might be some of the worst days, or it might even be a period, it might be some of the worst weeks or months in our lives, in the midst of all of that, somehow, I can't explain it, but somehow, there's still a reason to hope. And we can hope because we trust and we have faith that God is there, that God will always provide, that the divine sees all of us, especially the ones who society puts down the most. God sees them, and God's love is with them first. That's what we call the preferential option for the poor. That throughout the scriptures we would notice that God's love, God's grace, God's mercy goes out to the poor, goes out to the rejects, the outcasts, women, young people. I mean, we know the list. And Luke is a major portrayal of God's preferential option for the poor especially. Because Christ is always seeking out the poor, the marginalized, the aching. God has a way of finding us in the midst of our suffering. And while it's super uncomfortable, and sometimes, if not more than sometimes, demoralizing, the Christian thing to do is to practice hope. Even when it feels like there's zero optimism left. I don't know. There's something inside of us that still wants to hold on to the maybe, just maybe, that things might get better. And to engage those feelings is to practice hope. To pray is to practice hope. And it's not easy to practice hope, though. I mean, to be honest, it's easier, at least I think it's easier to lose hope and to slip into despair than it is to actually practice hope. But as one of my favorite quotes I'll always remember, this is from Mariam Kaba, who is a U.S. abolitionist, so she's over in the States. But what she would have learned from a Catholic nun is that hope isn't a feeling, hope isn't an emotion, but rather hope is a discipline, or hope is a practice. So if somehow we could still find a way to practice hope, to believe as best as we can that God will come through, if even not necessarily in the way we might want, we can trust and we can believe that God will work it out for the best. And we can only fully practice hope when we experience that movement from knowing to not knowing. When we encounter Christ in the unknowing, that's where the ego drops. Because at that point, that's when we realize we can't see the face of God and live. Because we realize here's this presence, and this presence knows absolutely everything about us. And this presence loves us beyond appreciation that we might even be able to appreciate for our own selves. So at that point, it just makes no sense to have up any armor. At that point, it's really just vulnerability and connection. And I feel like we see glimpses of that repeated in different parts of our lives. So, like in romantic relationships, for example, or healthy romantic relationships, I should say, in parental relationships, especially, in relationships between mentors and mentees, we see that being repeated where the ego has no choice at that point but to drop. And that's where the true, fulfilling connection begins. It's like where the ego ends. Not that the ego is a bad thing, but where the ego ends, where the knowing ends, that's where the Christian life begins. And I know it feels scary, and I know it feels uncomfortable, but it's also natural. It's also a natural part of life too. Because it's like, for example, we move from being inside of our mother's wombs to not. We move from being in primary school to not. Same thing when it goes to secondary school too. Same for so many different phases in our life. We move from knowing something, we move from being somewhere to then not. We move from knowing to not knowing. And to move from what is comfortable to what's not is not easy, but there is a lot of grace in that. And if there's one thing that we can be sure about, is that God will make sure that we are taken care of through all of it. And at that point, why would we want to do anything else but to leave everything behind and to follow? Anyways, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.